Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are on month 2 of the 7-month chakra immersion for deep healing. And we're going to be exploring transitioning away from the red of root and into the orange of flow, all things flow. And it may seem kind of interesting that the flow chakra is orange when we are going to be talking about water. So you're going to see that there are lots of different colors that come into the softness of the flow. And that's one of the key words. So what I want to do in this presentation is talk with you about the first week of dipping our toes into the flow. So I'm going to cover off on 3 themes. They are creativity, emotions, and relationships. So what we do through the chakra immersion for every month is we're going to start with big, broad brush themes, and then we chunk it down into the body, into food, and then we bring everything together as a synthesis. So this is the big, broad brush for the flow and all things that it encompasses. Now, keep in mind that I have selected certain themes. There is an abundance of different things that the flow holds within us. And so as I get into these different themes, what you're going to notice is that some of them are tangential and they really encroach upon other aspects. But to make our lives easier, I think that if we just look at the crest of the wave and look at the highlights of what the flow is about, we can then start to whittle down into the wave of everything that it really brings along for that ride. I love using all these water analogies. I really resonate with the flow. The flow has been my saving grace, quite honestly. It was something, I know that many of you know my story, but for many years I've had, just issues with my own flow. And so coming into my flow, my femininity, being able to move and groove rather than get stuck and stagnant. I think much of the first part of my life was really tumultuous because I was wrestling with the root. And I didn't realize that much of the healing of the root can be helped by moving the flow. You know, these two work in tandem. And I don't want us to look at any of these chakras as isolated buckets. I think that one of the things that has happened within the chakra world out there, and that's why I don't really tend to use the word chakra, because I don't really want to attach to a lineage that has kind of taken on a certain sculpting of these things. I really see them as the 21st century way of looking at systems, which is why I give them keywords. So as we move through each of these, we are going to be layering. It's like a sandwich. You know, it's, yes, we didn't leave behind the root. We are bringing the root now into the flow. But yes, we are going to give some concentrated time to the flow, but I don't want us to leave behind the essence of so much of the learnings of the truth. The root. What was coming to mind there, which my mind changed into truth, was trust. Trust. You know, in order to really feel like we can flow, this quote from Nietzsche, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. So you notice in this picture, this woman is, well, first of all, she's on a beach at sunset. Her hair is flowing. Her body is flowing. She is, she's not even on the ground. She's got one foot way up in the air and the other one not even attached to the ground. And so sometimes we need some of these moments to give us perspective in life. It just has to be, you know, and we have to let go of expectations. We have to let go of perfectionism. We have to let go of rigidity. You know, for some of us, that's going to really speak volumes, and we're going to feel like, ooh, I was waiting for somebody to say that. And for others of us, we may feel like, I need my structure. And I think that for each of us, if we can imagine the root and flow like bars on a graph, these two bars, they're in sync with each other. It's like a rhythm, right? It's like the sun and the moon. It's like yin and yang. It's like masculine, feminine. And so the idea here is that we need to bring them into balance. Sometimes we're going to need more flow than others. Other times we're going to have to go back down and gravitate to the root because we need a foundation. We need to earth. We need to get centered. But there are times in life that we need a little chaos. All right. And, you know, the good thing about the flow is that with the root, what tends to happen is we get a little bit rigid, right? We find ourselves in these rigid ruts, routines, regimens. Look at all these R's for the rootiness of what these energies create, right? So what the flow does is it's like, okay, let's jump out of all of that, much like the woman that was in that photograph, and let's start to unearth, remove ourselves a bit from our everyday situation and start to see things differently. And what I know just even in the scientific literature and from what I've observed is that, gosh, the more we can be in that state of flow, this is truly, it's mobility, it's variety, it is functionality. Flow is, if anybody is thinking about health and vitality, what I would say is that it's so much connected to flow. It's connected to each of the 7 systems, but it's so connected to flow because, as my dad would say, when you stop moving, you start dying. And I think he took that from Shawshank Redemption, the movie. But there's some truth to that. When you stop moving, you know, when you don't want to get out of bed in the morning, when you don't want to move your way through life, when you don't want to think differently and start going with the flow of, okay, this just happened today and that doesn't feel quite comfortable, but it just needs to happen. So Mark Twain, so many people have rephrased this quote, but I took it from Mark Twain, who said, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And this I've also seen in a Dr. Seuss book. It's kind of like, how can you expect different results when you've been in a groove? And the root is really good for the groove, breaking the ground. But then the flow gets us to say, well, wait a minute, we need to start shaking things up. They're actually a great duo. The root being very masculine, the flow being very feminine. They're a great partnership. And we each hold within us the essence of masculine and feminine. So yeah, the flow is like, let's shake it up. Let's change the furniture around in this room because I'm really tired of looking at things in the same way. And the root's like, but it works. It's functional. And the flow's like, my senses aren't appeased and enlightened by this configuration, right? The flow is all about emotions. The flow works in the moment. So the flow is very unique. I think it's a place that many of us don't feel comfortable with as we get older. And you know why? Because our society is so focused on structure, rules, playing by the rules, needing to do certain things, fill certain requirements, the R of requirements, in order to essentially feel like you've achieved your foundation, and that foundation connecting to the all is one community of society. Well, the flow is kind of sticky and juicy and chaotic, and it's kind of like it's connected to some shadows, or at least shadows that have been created by society, in which there's this idea of emotions are lower. You need to control your emotions. You need to bring your root to your flow and control that chaotic flow. That shouldn't be that way, right? We get all these imprints. So this is not usually a place that people feel comfortable. It wasn't a place that I felt comfortable in for years until I started to develop health conditions that centered around these organs. And then it was like massive wake-up call. It's like, wait a minute, no, Deanna, you need to start living your days with a little structure and a lot of flow. And so that's what I've had to do. It's for my physical, emotional, not just emotional health, but mental health as well. So this is a painting let me just go back. All of which to say is if you start to feel uncomfortable with the flow more than you did with the root, that would completely make sense to me, because most people don't feel comfortable with the flow. I think they love the root. There's a lot of hurt and pain in the root, but the flow feels like, ooh, but weren't we told not to get into all this stuff? Talking about sex and juiciness and fertility and hormones and ooh, that's like fraught with all kinds of preconceptions. So yeah, we're going to get into that space. I think it's important. It's so much of who we are. So this is a painting by Manami Lingerfelt. I think it was back in 2013 that I had commissioned Manami to make some artwork for Food and Spirit. And I gave her a list of terms and I said, Manami, and I didn't even tell her what it needed to look like. I just said, okay, circles, women, partnership, coconuts, tropical fats, nuts and seeds. I mean, I gave her very disparate words. And I said, can you put this together in a way that it makes sense? And so she did. In such a beautiful way that is conducive to creative flow. So Manami put in here, let's start from the bottom and go up. You look at these ribbons of these, you see how she has these kind of chains, this watery layer. There's kind of like the matrix. I'm thinking like the cellular matrix of flow and different things kind of coming together. There's the swirl of the water. There's the fish, the orange fish that are in the water with some other colors too. There's the fetus, the embryo forming. There's the beautiful woman in the middle who's sitting bathed in this amazing circle that could be a sunset or it could be a slice of orange. You've got the coconuts. She's somewhere tropical and she's relaxed. She is one with her flow. And then the two women up at the top showing the essence of partnership. The flow, as you're going to see, is about partnership. I'm going to go through some basic slides on that. So as you look at this, the colors, the tropical feel, the relaxing feel, the feminine feel. The root is so much about the masculine, which we are all very well accustomed to because that's how society has been configured. But here is the rise of the feminine to meet the masculine in balance, not in greater proportion to. And I think that for some people, when they get really into, let's just say like an overactive flow, they might go on to the other side of like advocating for more feminine than more masculine, because there just has felt that there's been a lot of trauma and hurt and there isn't that balance, so it overcompensates. However, what we would really like is that these two things, these two essences of who we are, the root and the flow, are moving in tandem. They're almost moving like a wave, right? And Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, so good at recognizing these principles. All right, I'm bringing in pink. Some people ask me, well, where do certain colors fit in? Where does black fit in? Where does brown fit in? And everybody has, again, if we go by, people who have written books on chakras, everybody kind of has their own thing on it. I put pink in the flow. I'll tell you why. It comes from personal experience. It doesn't come from book knowledge. Some books might say, oh no, pink resonates with the heart, and everybody kind of has this fuzzy feel about pink, perhaps. No, I actually, when I was doing a lot of my own healing work, the two colors that came out the most were orange and pink. And there's something really feminine about pink. There's something really playful about pink. So what I'm doing is I pick up the energy of these colors, not at like an intellectual level. I pick it up at like a visceral level. Like, where do you belong? Where are you in me? You might find pink living somewhere else in your body. For the sake of this journey together, pink will live within flow. Pink and orange. It's kind of those melony, if I think of like a melon, or if I think of a sunset, many times these two colors, pinkish, this pinkish color, which is kind of, it's almost like pink is a hybrid of the red of the root and the orange of flow, and it's come together at this nexus interface of pink. And pink being the P for pink, P for playful. Okay, so a lot of play with the flow. The root is kind of serious. It can be serious. It can also be really assuring and stable and feel really good, like, you know, just having strong arms around you. Whereas with the flow, those arms are flailing. They're like, yeah, let's dance. let's pink. Let's have fun with some of these colors. So what I did with this, I recently started to make some infographics to help people to contextualize these systems. And one of the challenges with communicating chakra work, or, you know, again, system work as I see it, is that it is a broad net for many things. You toss that net into the ocean of all things of that system, and there are a lot of things that come up that don't necessarily seem related if you're an outsider, but they are all related. So I want you to take a look at this circular chart, if you will. I like circles. See what shape that you're connected to, because each of the different systems have a shape. And this is a shape that I've intuited. And so the root being the square, the flow being circular. Square, hard lines, angles. It's like a house, 4 corners, 4 sides. The flow doesn't have any corners, so it rolls, it moves. It's going to just kind of be like a wheel, and it doesn't have a beginning and an end. It's all kind of, you know, bunched in there together. So take a quick look at this, okay? And maybe start at 12 noon. Just gaze through each of these, going to 3 o'clock, down to 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And just pick one. Just don't use the head. Use your emotions. Which one are you connected to? Which one are you connected to? And make a note of whatever that is in your journal. Don't bring your head into this. Just write it down for now. We're not going to do anything more with it right now. Okay, so let me take exactly what I just had in this circular diagram, and for those of you who are a bit more root, let me put it in a square so that we can chunk it out. And this is how you can kind of tell where your dominant nature is. It's kind of like when people say right brain, left brain. This is like, are you rooty or flowy? And we learn in different ways, right? And I honor that. And sometimes we learn in different ways depending on where we are in our life cycle, all of that, or time of day. So if we chunk this out into, well, what is the flow about? Let's look at the body. And we're going to focus a whole week in week 2 of July just on the body. So getting into the anatomy of bladder, hips, kidneys, large intestine. Let me get some water. Some flow there. Everything that has to do with water, creativity, and emotions in the body are connected into the anatomy and physiology of the flow. So anatomy speaking, bladder, hips, kidneys, large intestine, ovaries, testes, the entire reproductive system. So I'm not just speaking to the ovaries, but the fallopian tube, the uterus, the vagina. Like, let's think of the whole incubator of creativity in the body. The sacrum. Let's not forget the back of the body either, because the hips, you know, kind of this basin. It's beautiful if you think of the body as this lower basin, and a basin holding water, and we are holding at our base all of this creativity, all of this juiciness, if you will. From a physiological point of view, what are the functions of the flow? So this is beyond structure and now into function. So growth, like how do cells create new cells? storage of fat, all things fat. So when we were in the flow, it was all things protein and minerals and things that they give us structure. Now with the flow, we are looking at water balance in the body. So if there is edema or swelling, or if there are issues with infertility, in my case, I had swelling in my left fallopian tube. It swelled up like a sausage. I had had endometriosis for so many years. I had all these adhesions, all this root into my flow, but it made for, now the water is starting to accumulate. That's no good. So it wreaked havoc on hormones. So that's what can happen. If the hormones, sex hormones, come from fat. So do you see the connection here between fertility and fat? And look at how for so many years, I'm going to get into this, I'm kind of preempting this, but for so many years we were low fat. And I think that this paralleled low flow, rejection of flow, rejection of the feminine self, rejection of chaos, rejection of creativity. And all these health problems happened. In general, when we avoided fat in the diet. My whole PhD, you've got the fat woman right here. My whole PhD was on essential fatty acid absorption and metabolism. I spent 4 years entrenched in all things fat. Studied lots of children's diapers, analyzed fecal samples for fat malabsorption. I mean, I am your girl when it comes to all things fat. So when we get into week 3, when we get into fats and oils, I'll share with you a little bit more about kind of the sciencey, but also the energetic side of fats, which doesn't really get talked about. Nutrients, so that speaks to the fatty acids, the fat-soluble vitamins, beta-carotene, carotenoids. We're going to get into orange-colored foods and why carotenoids. I'm not just your fat girl, I'm also your carotenoid chick, because I'm trying to use the alliteration here. My master's thesis, I spent 3 years working on my master's degree, and the whole time I was working with a professor who was all about carotenoids. So guess what I got to learn about for 3 years? And I did human clinical work on this. I was in the lab every summer analyzing with the HPLC, like all the carotenoids, lycopene, beta-cryptozanthin, lutein. We think it's just beta-carotene, but quite honestly, it's like 700 different carotenoids. And so as is typical with nutrition, typically there is one thing that gets the limelight, but all the other important diverse things don't get that same broad spectrum of attention. So I am going to shine some light on some of that. We'll get into foods in week 3. So I'm going to save that for then. And then if we think about lifestyle, going with the flow, why do I use that word flow? It's for good reason. Going with the flow, creating through the senses and emotions, is comfortable with sensuality and sexuality. When we, it's not an easy topic. And oftentimes I don't cover off on sexuality in my whole detox programs because I feel like it's an overwhelming topic for many people to take on. But you're in this with me for the long haul, for the depth, for the discovery. And we are going to talk about sexuality. So many taboos around this. I've actually worked with a woman who does sacred sexuality work. I've worked with her for 9 months, not specifically on sexuality, but sexuality is more than what we think. It's more than intercourse, right? It's kind of like how you move through the world. And I think part of the taboo of sexuality is because it has only stayed at one layer. It has not really risen to, you look at like East Indian culture, ancient cultures, and how they revered that creative connection of two people coming together. There's something spiritual about it. And I think that we have lost that sense of a spiritual connection to sexuality, truly. I'm no expert in this area. I'll just tell you that. But that has been part of my healing journey as well. Okay, and partnership, that's what we're talking about this week. So I spent a lot of time giving you an intro, but I do think it's important for you to get a good sense of where we're going to go with the flow. I've also created this flow matrix because it is helpful to see the translation between the physical aspects of these systems with the non-physical. So I'm a science and spirit kind of person. I know that of all things in the physical, that implies that there's something in the non-physical. So with me, what you're going to have is an insight, this window into how things interrelate. What is the nexus? Okay. And this is one of those nexus diagrams. And so it is, let's just start it with the top, right? Because all things start with energy first. And energy, most times we can't see it. We can only feel it and sense it, which requires flow, strongly requires flow. And so if I were just to say these words to you, flowing, solubilizing, relaxing, hydrating, creating, and feeling, this is the energy of the flow. Just see how you feel with the energy of the flow. And then if we distill that into big, broad brush life, like life on the planet Earth, there's inner movement. Now, primarily, we're going to get to outer movement when we're into the love. But inner movement, cellular movement, transport, exchange, synapses, how the heart is moving and in sync with the lungs. You know, there's this inner, we might look at it from the outside like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all this stuff is going on. It feels like chaos. But there is a symphony that is playing within. Partnership, how we deal with not just for the root, it was community. Now with the flow, it's partnership, it's one-on-one, it's intimate relationships. Intimate meaning friendship, intimate meaning spouse, partner, significant other, somebody who you have sexual relations with, or a deep, meaningful spiritual relationship. So there could also be a spiritual director, person, individual relationship. So it's a power of two. The flow is two. The root is one. It's like back to Carolyn May's all is one. The flow is how we are in relationship to another. And that's why so much of how we see the world really says something about us. Another person is simply a mirror, right? And so if somebody says, well, you know, I feel, you know, whatever we're picking up on with somebody else is really what is within. I mean, this is a pretty classic energetic principle and a healing principle and a psychological principle as well. So we've got partnership, we've got release in so many different ways. That could be even detoxification, moisture. So let's think of the skin for a second. The skin of structure. Think of how our skin as this template, as this fabric, but what keeps it alive is so much the moisture, how we feel good in our skin. Our creations, whether those are children, books, building something, creating a garden, whatever it is, creation spans so many different things. It could even be creating a single thought. Like every moment you have is a creation. And then, of course, emotions. Emotion, what fuels us, okay? So we've got life. These are the big principles of life, how that's coming down from energy. And then into the body, into the physical now, those individual cells that are filled with lipid. The border of every cell in your body is comprised of fat. You are flowing constantly. And the nature of those fats will determine how you flow. It will also determine this next one, intra and extracellular water, how you're holding things in and how you're letting things go. And sometimes things get kind of constricted. Other times things are very expansive. Sometimes we hold water. Why are we holding fluid? What is connected to the emotions that is not being released? What are we not releasing? What are we hanging on to? Large intestine, which is responsible for resorbing water. The urinary tract, think of the kidneys and all the facets of the urinary tract. It's kind of like the reproductive tract. It's not just the ovaries, just like the urinary tract is not just the kidneys. Gosh, you've got the bladder, the urethra. In men, I would even put in there prostate as part of that whole process. So there's a lot more with the urinary tract. Reproductive system, the gut and bacteria. So, and the reason why the gut and bacteria come into this is because they are our partners, right? I mean, basically what we're learning these days is that the gut microbiome rules us in a manner of speaking. And much of these bacteria are contained in the colon. And so how we get along with this group of bacteria says so much about who we are and how we flow, how we move, especially in the gut. Down to food, we're going to get through all of those foods when we go through week 3, looking at fats and oils, omega-3s, why the fascination of omega-3s, fish, nuts and seeds, tropical, all things tropical, water, carotenoids, fermented foods. And then we come down into the emotional sphere. Okay, so kind of both sides of the emotional sphere. Are we overly expressive, drama queen, have to like say everything that we feel at all times? Or are we completely the opposite, where we shirk back, we don't say anything, we keep our mouths shut about how we feel? And there's kind of that discomfort. So where are we on that spectrum of emotional release? If I were to think of each of these systems as ages and ages in our development, the one that coincides with the flow is, either they were the best years of your life, maybe the worst times of your life, or something in between, but it's the teenage years. So pretty much the decade of going from 11 to 20. This is when we were in hormonal flux, dynamism. Gosh, we were establishing our own sexual identity, who we are, looking and feeling out our physical aesthetics, beauty, paying attention to, how we feel about life. It's such a feeling time. And teenagers, I don't have any of my own, but I've observed enough, and I've been one, to know that there isn't a lot of rational behavior sometimes. It is so driven by emotion. This time and place. I mean, think of the first time maybe you started to form a crush on somebody, right? Although now that happens much earlier, but when you actually have a physiological basis and hormones, right? And breasts start forming, secondary sex characteristics start appearing. And you might have had a crush when you were 5 in kindergarten on somebody, but now a crush is a little bit different. Now you have a physiological response to that crush. So I want you to be reflecting on, how were you when you were a teenager? And you might even revert back to some of those memories. They might be coming out in your dreams this month, which could be interesting. Could be fascinating to see what emerges for you in the way of your flow, right? Through those teenage years. That for me is definitely a period of my life that was in most upheaval. Don't ever want to go back and redo that. But for other people, oh my gosh, that was like, for my dad, he always says those were the golden years. Like, he had the best time of his life. He even says that to this day, and he's in his 70s. Those were the best years of his life. It's like, wow. And he also, went to Catholic school like I did. Wow. Still had the best years of his life. So anyway, evaluate what that means for you, what it was like for you to be a teenager. So if I were to think of the flow and put her in a body, and I want you to be thinking about your flow archetype here, and we'll do a little bit of exploration on that. I want us to create a power animal totem for each of our 7 systems. So when we did the root, I had asked you to connect with your root power animal. And now, as part of the next layer of this totem, I want you to reflect on, okay, what is the animal or being that you want to bring in? You might want to bring in a goddess here. You know, for the root, having an animal kind of feels appropriate because it's so earthy and animal-like and instinctual. For your flow, you might want to bring in something else. And so I'm using the word totem by way of just like stacking each of these different aspects of ourselves into a consolidated whole. You can have them in a circle if you want, but we are staging through them linearly. So first, your power animal. Second, let's figure out who your flow symbol is. You know, and I hear this woman with orange hair, orange glasses. She is just in her flow, right? Now, some of us, you've already been gathering this, I'm sure, because I've been alluding to it as I've been talking about it. We can be on a spectrum of flow. And many of you who have gone through my food and spirit training, you already know this. We might be in balance and in harmony for ourselves, and it feels right. We might be a bit overactive where, and I'll get into this a little bit, but essentially, you know, just overly feeling everything from everybody, overly expressing. I went through this period as well. You know, it's almost like in order to find balance, sometimes we have to experience to know what it feels like to come from this place of being underactive in flow, like where we're not expressing emotions, we're not creative, we're not feminine, we're not going with the flow, we like rules and rigidity. And then we go to the opposite end. And that's kind of what happens with the teenage years. It's like, wait, mom and dad, you have just given me so many rules. No more rules. I'm doing my own thing. And then we go into overactive flow. So the teenage years can be very overactive with so much activity that gets kind of crazy. So through this process of life, we kind of find what feels balanced for us. And you can always take the quiz on the Whole Detox website. You can just do that just free. Just go through those questions. If you have the Whole Detox book, you can go through that. If you are a numbers person and you say, I want to know exactly where I stack up, but just make sure you look relative to everything else. Sometimes there is no under or over. It's showing you as balanced, but when you start to compare it against the other systems, it's like, well, wait a minute, my flow is way overactive, or wait a minute, my flow is way underactive. How do you know? Okay. So we'll be exploring some of that. A healthy flow would be somebody who's very comfortable with their emotions. They're creative. They can express emotions without kind of like going on overdrive. Like I'm thinking of the metaphor of a water faucet. Like when we turn on the faucet as high as it can go and stuff just dumps out, overactive flow. But when we kind of turn that back and we just have a steady stream, comfortable, it fills up the glass of water we need, balanced flow. When it's dripping out or dry and crusty because no water's coming out, underactive flow. Okay, so these folks, they go with the flow of their lives, they're living their dreams. Let me just mention for a second, I felt very strongly to mention in this group talking about money. There is the survival aspect of money for the root. There is the abundance aspect for flow. So the energy of currency and of, you know, if we call it wealth, whatever, prosperity, the root materializes that. The flow harnesses it, if that makes sense. So this is currency versus abundance. There's a great image of this that comes to mind for me right now. It's in the Osho Zen Tarot deck. Beautiful image of, for the card abundance, they have this Dionysius-like man who's in rainbow clothing and sitting very comfortably and flowing on his pillow, and he's got the sun and the moon, and he is just so in his zone. So this is abundance, and this is, if any of you follow the Abraham Hicks work, talking about being in the feeling of abundance in order to create the physical matter of money. Many people believe that they just need to work hard in order to make money rather than to come from the place of flow and the energy of abundance. What does that mean? Connecting into the feeling first. There's so many different traditions and ways of teaching, like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, does a lot with feeling first, physical manifestation second. How do we manifest if we don't have feeling? Feeling drives our actions, our behaviors, and so much of our lifestyle. So healthy relationships with others yet honor their own uniqueness. So these folks don't go into a relationship to complete themselves. They go into a relationship to honor themselves. And I seeing this last one here, this should be number one probably. They have fun. They can enjoy. They can have pleasure in their lives without that feeling of guilt. Now, of course, there's a balance to all of that. Unhealthy flow, feeling stuck, stagnant in anything, can't move, can't create, can't emote, maybe prone to emotional eating. We'll talk about emotional eating during the week of the food, week 3. Body has issues. So again, fertility issues, hormonal issues, water collection issues, constant urinary tract infections. I used to teach this course called Nutrition for the Soul at a college here where I live. I did that in 2008. And I remember I had a woman in the class, and she had constant urinary tract infections. And the moment we got to, and she divulged this to me after the fact, but as we were going through the flow, she's like, oh my gosh, this is my water, my irritation with water and emotions and her own sense of creativity. And when she started to get into this space, she had incredible growth and healing just from examining these concepts that connected into her physiological responses. I mean, our body, which is so rooty, is a huge messenger. And that's why if something's going on with me, it's like, okay, something's going on with my right eye, or something's going on with my belly. I'm absolutely 100% paying attention to that in that moment. It's like, okay, what am I being told? So when we get a lot of these issues, and this is for men and women alike, if men have estrogen issues, we can definitely go deep into that. But there is this sense of, our body is letting us know through its sense of flow or non-flow. And then we also, one of the ways that unhealthy flow might manifest is through issues with intimate relationships and sexuality. So one of the things to do a little bit of a share in the way that I was unhealthy with flow, especially during my 20s, I dated a lot of people. I couldn't commit. I just would enter a relationship, feel the flow and the magic, the romance. And then it was like, okay, and then I'm out. I don't want the person to leave me. I'm going to leave them first. I'm out of here. No commitment. But it came from a place of dysfunction, pain, and almost like, I don't want you to hurt me, so I'd rather just leave, right? And just really having an issue with intimate relationship. And so to be looking at how do we gauge intimate relationships, this can say a lot about our flow, our own sense of sexuality. Carolyn Mace talks about the energy of the prostitute archetype, not in the sexual sense, but the prostitute in the way of what are we selling our soul to? So let's take it out of the body, out of the bodily prostitute perspective, and go into, let's up level it, right? And start talking about like the prostitute. How are we manifesting that archetype? What are we? And I did that for several years, working at a corporation that I had resistance to even going into before I did go into it, but I did it anyway because I needed the money. I had to pay off my school debt. Right. And I prostituted my soul's lessons. I mean, I learned a lot in that experience, and I was only there for 3 years. But the bigger question for you is to ask yourself, where are you selling yourself out? And I think some people do that in relationships. they sell themselves short because, it kind of fits the status quo and it's comfortable and we're living together and it's all good. But there isn't that flow, right? The sacredness. So think about that for yourself, right? This is for the food and spirit practitioners who have gone through my training again. You all know this, kind of looking at the patterns and how we look at flow and its overactive, excessive profile vis-a-vis underactive or deficient profile. So there might be certain things. Here's the takeaway. The takeaway is not to memorize this list and say, oh my gosh, where am I deficient? The takeaway is to feel your flow in the way of saying like, wow, I'm actually doing quite well in food and with orange foods, and I'm pretty good with fats and oils, but I've got some emotional things. Like sometimes there's a subsection of our flow that we need to work on, much like the root, much like any of these systems, because they are multifaceted. There might be one, how there's like one key that just turns the lock of one of these doors that have been closed, but once that door is open, it's like, oh, the light pours forth, and then like all of a sudden all the other doors are open. Sometimes there can be that one little blind spot where we kind of feel like, oof, there's something going on here. I'm not really wanting to look at that. Maybe I'll just focus on the food because it's safer and it feels better and it's something I can do. I don't really want to go into emotions. So if you decide to do some emotional work this month, which we're in for 2 lunar eclipses, I believe it's 2. We're in for a bit of a tidal wave here with lots of the different astrological things happening in July. So what I would say is prepare yourself now. We're on day 1. We've got 29 more days. And what I would say is focus on your self-care for flow. What does that mean? Does it mean taking more baths? Does it mean going swimming somewhere if you live somewhere warm, or maybe you go to the gym and you use the swimming pool? Does it mean setting up a meeting with your therapist or counselor? Yes, 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 all of those things. Whatever it is, go with your resonance. Take care of your flow this month. This is a tough one for many people. And you thought maybe the root was tough, but this one is, yeah. So what I'm going to course through, I've already done a pretty robust intro. I spent a lot of time on that. Wow, I spent just about an hour on that. So what I want to do is, in a flowy way, I want to wax and wane through some of these 3 areas and give you some things to be thinking about, okay? And I like to teach with images, and it's a very flowy way to teach. I've actually transitioned so much from my teaching style. It depends where we're at and what we're doing, but this course and journey together, I feel like we need to go symbolic, right? We need to go deep. And deep is not always in the head. Deep can be felt in the body, in the viscera. I actually really want you, much like the root, I want you to feel this material in the bones, in the cells, in your very being. Now, some of you, when I asked you to write me and tell me what you wanted from this journey together, you said, I want more creativity. I want to create something. I'm wanting to have a more expansive life. So I am going to prompt you on this one. This is where, again, I've had my own healing experience and journey, and I feel like we're going to have some fun with this one. So if you have some fear around this, bring it up. Bring up the fear, because that's showing me that there's something here for you. There's something really good and juicy for you, in this process of creation. Creation is sometimes really messy. I mean, look at these hands sculpting this wheel, right? And sometimes when I paint, it's like, oh man, I have to got to put the blanket on the floor. I got to get everything all set up. I got to get goopy. And when I'm done painting, I mean, it's all over my fingers. It's totally messy. And whatever I've just worn to paint, I can forget about it. So creation is messy, and it doesn't matter if it's something like a formalized piece of art, or if it's like a new business, or if it's a child. Think of how messy creating a child is. My goodness. Creation is messy. It's chaotic. And the feeling here is to be sunk deep into the beauty, the creativity of that chaos. So you know how with the root we had a lot of R's? With the flow, we're going to have a lot of C's. A lot of C's. Commitment, creating. You're going to see this as we go. Connection, and there's this sense of just getting out, getting clear with where we're at. So yeah, I'm going to be encouraging you to do the unexpected, get out of your ruts. Ruts are nice to form for a little bit of a time period. It's kind of like training wheels, but then after a while, you got to take those training wheels off the bike, and you just got to, you might fall a couple of times when you've taken your bike out for a ride, and it's like, oh my gosh, I remember when I was first learning to ride my bike. I didn't want to fall. I didn't want to have scuffed knees and bleeding sores. But sometimes that's what it takes. So one of the biggest things that I see with people is that they don't think that they're creative. They don't think that they're artists. And when I speak artists, when we're here in this group together, I'm speaking about the archetypal artist. Carolyn Mace would say that we all have 4 archetypes, and I believe she's left one out, and that is that of the artist. The artist is the creator in all of us, and it's a matter of what we've chosen to create. That's completely up to us. We can create what we want to create, but we're all artists. We're artists in the physical body sense, we're artists in the emotional sense, we're artists in the thought sense, we're artists in the spiritual sense. So to me, this is a cornerstone archetype, is that we're artists. And so some of us, I have a friend who is a PhD data analyst. She is an artist. She is an artist in how she looks at numbers through her profession. Artists, we have so many limiting beliefs around what it means to be an artist. When you look at this slide, you may be thinking, oh, that means I'm going to have to paint. No. It can just be, we're going to get into the 7 creatives. That's what you're going to be focused on this week. So there's more here. There's more, right? I want you to think, imagine a piece of pink bubble gum. I want you to stretch that bubble gum and imagine that this is like redefining what it means to be an artist. Because it's not just with paintbrush in hand. It's not just with a musical instrument that you're holding. No, it is you. You're already that. So now it's like, let's bring it out through flow. Let's dance with that artist self of us. So definitions of creativity need to be creative. I think that's, I almost want to just get rid of the word creativity, because it has come to mean certain things to certain people. And it's beyond that. It's beyond, let's get plastic, let's get flexible, let's get really bubblegum about what we feel creativity is. And I want you to reflect on that. In fact, write this in your journal. At some point this week, I think would be optimal. This would be really good. If you could do a little laddering activity on creativity, the word. So keep reflecting on that word creative. You can write it on a note card. You just have like a piece of paper where you put the word creativity and just have it there in front of your journal, and you're looking at it. And every time you look at it, you write the first word that comes out. Do that for about 10 to 20 times. Just see, what are your preconceptions around creativity? What are your preconceptions around creativity? Let's get bubblegum with creativity, okay? Here are 2 different quotes around creativity, and I want you to come up with your own quote. William James, genius means little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. Just seeing things differently. And then I put together this quote, creativity is taking the unseen perception into the seen reality. I feel like so much of creativity is about witnessing. And for me, it was when I started to show my paintings to the world that the magic turned on. Yeah, I could go and create and make these huge, bigger than life paintings and feel really good about it. But there was a missing link. My healing link was that it had to be seen, not judged, just witnessed. So I did have ultimately a small gallery showing. We have a friend here with a small art gallery. At the time she had it. And I invited my friends, my coworkers, and I just said, you want to come to this gallery? And I had people come and look at these paintings. I was surprised who came. It was really cool. And I didn't want them to say if they liked it or they didn't like it. I just, it's just like there's a part of me that just needed to be seen. And so much of sexuality, reproductive health is not seen. It's in the dark. It's secret. So in these paintings that I created in order to be seen, it was all about my heart-shaped uterus. And, there was nothing obvious about it unless you were a very astute observer and you could start seeing patterns in those paintings. So yeah, art, to me, creativity is our internal world made visible to the external. You got to bring it out. If you go through this month and you say, wow, I'm more creative. I drew a bunch of doodles in my journal. I journaled. I was singing in the shower, major flow activity there. You got to bring it out. You got to bring it out with your partner, with your community. It needs to be seen. Otherwise, there's a missing piece. I want you to know that. And that comes not from, again, book knowledge that I've accrued. It comes from my visceral experience of creativity. Creativity needs to be seen. Much like in the root, our story needs to be shared. And through sharing our story, whether or not we get feedback, somewhere at some point, somebody else is affected by that story because they share some piece of it. And through you sharing in your creative expression, whatever it is, there is something that's turned on with somebody else that through our cosmic connection and unification, it's tracking right back to you. Okay, it needs to be seen. So there are lots of artistic conduits out there. And what I've hoped for this journey together for 7 months is to take a more creative, flowing approach. If you'll notice that when we first started out, I was kind of like, okay, everybody, let's kind of be creative and sharing this together. And some of you were comfortable with that and some of you were not, which is okay. That is absolutely fine. What's most important is now coming into your flow on your individual level, whatever feels comfortable for you, and doing that fully. And so that could be through any number of things. I want you to explore the realm of possibilities, the full spectrum of what that could entail for you. And let's just get out of it's almost like the phrase, let's get out of our own way. I don't know who said that, but so many different spiritual teachings allude to this. Like even my shamanic teacher years ago, she always talks about being a hollow bone. Get out of your way. Most times we are so in our own way, we cannot get out of our box. And sometimes we need to get into a different bowl, a different sphere in order to think differently, right? So this quote came to me as well, and this is one of my paintings. I painted it on summer solstice. Summer solstice, I always feel, is such a time of, it's the ultimate of flow and fire together. We're not in the fire yet, obviously, but blood circulates within the body. Blood moves through us to ground us into being a physical person, to being the root. The flow has as its substance creativity. So there's the physical of flow through blood. So this is where the root and the flow meet together. It's through this interface of what flows through us physically and non-physically. So blood circulating within the body, creativity flowing within the soul. Creativity represents another way of finding meaning in life. Lots of great literature on this, by the way. I have a whole lecture where I talk about creativity and healing, creativity in the healing arts, how we can use creativity to heal. And I do think that many things cannot be expressed through words, verbalized. We have to feel them. We have to express them in different ways through some conduit of our creativity that allows us to, again, feel witnessed, heard, and find meaning. And meaning, as you're going to see, is so connected to the spirit or the seventh chakra. So creativity is a process of becoming more fully who you are. It feels really good to be creative. It feels juicy, enlivening. It feels liberating to be creative, definitely. But there can be a lot of chaos and change. So we need to be tuned into that. Chaos is not comfortable, right? Because chaos can mean clutter, another C, all these C's, and a lot of change. And sometimes the root doesn't like the feeling of change, kind of rocks the ship. We are creative in our cellular structure. So I want you to be thinking about that this week in terms of our growth and renewal, right? And to imagine ourselves being infused. Visualize, visualize, visualize. You know, there's this quote running around on social media, I think it's from Abraham Hicks, that we can spend 15 minutes of visualization is more powerful than like a full day of working. It's so true. We set the stage for our template through this process of visualizing, connecting into our cells. Our cells are like a universe. So what are our little universes doing within us, right? And within functional medicine, there's so much talk about the DNA. Is your DNA really your destiny? Well, I think your DNA is this ribbon of potential. I think there's a code within you. There is a lineage. There's an ancestral, okay, now we're talking root. There's this ancestral thread, right, that's moving through you. And you can make certain things light up and give them flow, or you can turn certain things off. And I do think that is within your flow. Your root gives you the DNA. Your flow gives you the ability to express. So there's always this exchange going on with you, which is why when we get into more of the body aspects, talking about the exchange, some people are just really good ideators. They are super creative, but they're not good implementers. I've hired some of these kinds of people, even within my own small business over the years, like people who are really good creative strategist, high-level people, but then they can't bring it down into implement. They can't bring it down to the root and have that exchange. And so that exchange can happen in the macro of life. It can happen in the micro of our cells. How are our cells exchanging and creating back and forth? Physical creativity, the ovaries, already been talking about that, and we'll get more into that when we talk about the body. But how can we say we're not artists when we have, even if we don't have our ovaries anymore, they were there, or the imprint of them energetically is left within us. The ovaries, liquids. I mean, sexual intercourse is a very messy, chaotic experience, right? The liquid of the ejaculate, of menstrual secretions, the goopy, clots and messiness, and vaginal secretions. And, it's interesting because most women don't want to talk about this. I've always been the one in my family who is the most vocal about, female health and what's going on in our bodies as women. And I can always feel like my mom and my sister like, oh, too much. It's like, no, but we don't talk about this enough. And maybe that's why we get blocks, is because we didn't talk about it. And how do we sit within these creative liquids within us? There's a great book. It's a great book. I like it very much. It's called Wild Feminine. She really gets it. When I was having a lot of these creative issues, I went to seek out Mayan, Mayan, abdominal massage, because I was like, you know what? There needs to be movement. Something's going on, and I'm not getting movement. I'm getting stuck and stagnant in my reproductive system. I need to move these fluids. I need to move them. And when we don't move them, they dry up. We become, we don't have, these things need to be viscous. And now on the other side, we don't want things like candida, and we don't want yeast infections. This would be overactive flow, too many liquids, too much ejaculation, too much intercourse. There are both sides to this, right? And we just have to feel out where we are with all of it. Pregnancy. For those of us who have had children, I have not. Pregnancy is, goodness, truly physically creative, right? The flow of this is one of my paintings, uterine flow. You can see, these colors, I'm looking at it now, these colors that I painted, and whenever I'm painting, I'm not in my head, so I just kind of do it, and then I look back at it later like, oh yeah, that could be a uterus. These colors, you can see why I'm putting pink together with melon and orange, right? Kind of these sunset hues. These are very feminine, and even I'm saying here uterine flow, but there is a sense of this for men as well. And men maybe are a bit more towards the reddish side of flow and bring in more of the root area. But there is this sense of orange and warmth. The psychology of orange is there's some kind of playfulness, alerting. It could be both. Just like red can be passionate and alerting to danger. Same with flow and orange. Orange can be a warm sunset and soothing and tropical as much as it can be a construction cone. Or it can be, you're going to see like a life raft in the ocean, right? A lot of orange with sea and nautical equipment. The birth canal, birthing out. And this doesn't only have to be the vagina, but think of all the birth canals in life. I often say that the mouth is the birth canal of our throat chakra. We have, as women, we have a lower and an upper birth canal. Birth canals. Think of this symbolically, not just physically. Sacred sexuality. Let's see where we go with this one. And perhaps I can share with you some blogs, some further reading material. But this goes hand in hand with what I'm saying about creativity, right? Being creative with how we think about sexuality. It's not just sex for sex sake. We're talking here co-creation. And it doesn't have to necessarily, it can involve co-creating feelings together. So yeah, let's see how you do with this one in terms of really expanding into that. Sensuality, getting into the senses. What I love about this image is that she's touching flowers and she's smelling them, and it's so close to her lips, her nose, like all of the sensory organs, and touch is being part of that. So flowers are going to come out a lot for the flow. And I would say to treat yourself with some flowers, some really juicy flowers to remind yourself of your own internal flow. And I can already tell I'm hedging onto the flow. We're in the weekend right before we officially start the flow. I have 3 sets of flowers in our kitchen, and normally I might have 1. So there's something already happening. I'm feeling this shift over. So treat yourself to flowers. Flowers remind us of the beauty of life. They remind us of our sensitivity, our fragility. And as part of being creative, even though all of us are women in this group, men have their goddess, men have their feminine, and I want you to explore your feminine sense of creativity. Evaluate and journal with her. What is your inner goddess like? Is she expansive and laying out there like a Greek goddess with lots of flowers and robes on her? Or is she a bit more tight-lipped and contractive, confined? Does she have some narrowing, some blocks, some things that she'd like to talk with you about? So let's examine our goddess. Our goddess connects to our sense of creativity. All right, again, I'm spending a lot of time on this, but hopefully this will fuel you going forward. I want to make the next lectures shorter. Let's whiz through emotions. We're going to bring back emotions when we get into emotional eating. Emotions are so juicy, and it's amazing how many people shy away from them because they seem so overwhelming, but they're really juicy, and in fact, they can fuel so much of our creativity. They can feel intense, which is why I think some people move back from them because it feels overwhelming. And people have that sense of being cautious around their expression of feelings. So what I would say is find that balance for you, whatever it is, a little bit of being cautious and, not having to divulge everything to everybody wherever you go. And being honest, authentic. If you do need an emotional date with yourself, letting that out, setting a time and doing some journaling. I'm also bringing in here in this discussion of emotions, the idea of rescuing. Oftentimes what can happen when we start to feel emotions is that, or we hear emotions from other people, is that we want to step in and kind of solve it. And the way I see emotions is just the opposite. Like if we can hang on to them like this life preserver in an ocean, like a sea of emotion, and we feel like we can hang on to it, it could take us somewhere. It could give us a little bit of a sense of like, wow, there's something interesting in this. We might be able to rescue some parts of ourselves from our depths through the conduit, this life preserver of emotions. So it's kind of turning it topsy-turvy. You will have an assignment for this week, which will be tracking your emotions. Most people do not know what they feel. We're so out of touch with our emotions that we use head words. We use mind words. We use words like, I'm concentrating, I'm focusing. These are not emotions. Emotions are like, I'm really angry. I'm grieving. I'm really disappointed. I feel disappointed. And then take that emotion into your body. Where does that emotion, where does it live within you? All emotions kind of like to hang out. If we don't let them out, they hang out. So instead of letting them hang out and cause a ripple effect, don't you like these water metaphors? Let's see if we can let them express in good, healthy ways. And the literature would suggest that we so need to do that. We'll get into emotional eating, which is essentially eating instead of feeling, and get into some of the strat. I just love this graphic, by the way. I love her socks. This girl is so flowy. If I were just to say, like, again, flow embodied in a little bit of a overactive flow way, I mean, look at the clock. Even the sense of structure that she does have in her life, and she does have some right angles here. Things are topsy-turvy. She's going back on her four-legged chair. She's got one foot off the ground and the other one kind of tiptoe. That's kind of a flow pose. Are you kind of sensing that? Similar to that other woman with the sunset. So yeah, there's the beauty of letting it all out in a kind of childlike teenage adolescent way, but yet making sure that we've got some connection into our root so that it doesn't overtake us, because emotions can surely do that. We are going to have a lot of moon activity this month, so I want you to move with the moon. I want you to track the moon cycles. I'm going to post some things on the moon. I'm going to write that down so I remember that. Lots of moon stuff this month, and we're also in the time of Cancer. Cancer is ruled by the moon and emotions. I didn't even plan that when I put together the 7-month personal healing experience. I did not rationalize and say, oh, July is perfect for the flow because we've got lunar eclipses and we've got all this stuff going on. No way. I just kind of moving with it without expectation and seeing what shows up. So we're going to have a lot of moon stuff showing up. And then finally, let's close on partnerships, relationships, one-on-one. Here is where I know many of you weren't able to or did not make the time for your partner experience in June for the root. So what I would say here is that it's really important for the flow. How you show up to the partner experience is going to say a lot symbolically about your flow, okay? So see what happens there, because so much of how we relate to other people actually starts with ourselves. I love this image of this woman. I deliberately picked this image because she's in orange. She's in an orange, stretchy, flowy dress. She's on the sand of a beach. and she's completely in tune with herself. Like, to me, this feels like a balanced flow image, right? And so it's all about how we relate to ourselves, and how we relate to others says something about how we are relating to ourselves. And that will connect into how we are relating to ourselves. Our cells are in relationship. Our mitochondria is in relationship to our ribosomes, is in relationship to our DNA, is in relationship to protein translation, is in relationship to DNA, is in relationship to the nucleus. We are a multifaceted system based on relationship. This is why I've never been a person who has subscribed to just being about the gut. So many people say, oh, it's all about the gut. Okay, well, that's their point of entry, their portal of entry. That's fine. Some cardiologists, they're all about the heart, and they say, oh, you only have one heart, so important, and it all comes from the heart. And then the brain people think that they're really smart because they're all about the brain and all about the intellect, and it's like, oh, nope, it's only about the brain, okay? The brain rules everything else. Well, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's all about the cell. Like, it's all about relationship amongst all of these tissues with each other. And one is not better than the other. I don't know where we got this idea that one thing is better than the other. This hierarchical approach. This is a shadow of the root. It's a shadow of structure when we think that one thing is better than the other. You know, it was like when I was firmly entrenched, back to the root, in yoga communities, there was this feeling and a hierarchical, almost an egotistical view that you had to eat a certain way in order to truly be a yogini. And if you weren't abiding through the rules of yoga. When I'm thinking to myself, what the heck? Yoga is about union with self, with your inner being. It's not so much about, it's about guidelines and a gentle structure, but not with limitation and not with judgment and saying like, okay, I'm not following this particular diet and therefore I am less than. I'm not spiritual enough. I think it's a violation and a true shadow of the root when we think that one thing is better than the other. This is hierarchy. This is where we get greed, where we get lots of ego entering in. Again, root-like structure. And even in corporations, it's so much easier for somebody to say, oh, you go through my manager and relate to me. But it's like, this is the age of the collective. This is the age of relationship. And so if we don't have relationship within ourselves, how can we expect to have relationship with everybody else around us? This might be a trigger for some of you in terms of feeling like, wow, where are the hierarchies in my life? Where are the judgments? How can I collapse, a C word, how do I collapse into the chaos of seeing everything on the same playing field? All diets on the same playing field, all belief systems on the same playing field, all portals of entry into the health field, in the same playing field. That's how the flow plays, is through relationship and not one better than the other, right? Kind of got off on a tangent on that one, but I feel really strongly about that. And when we connect into the relationship of our body, maybe we can talk about some of the yoga poses. I am a yoga teacher by training, not actively teaching right now, but in yoga, if any of you do yoga, here's where focusing on hips, pelvis, squeezing and soaking poses, getting into the low body, squeezing. Sometimes we call these the tourniquet poses, where it's almost like if you were to take a rag and it was wet and you squeezed it and turned it and twisted it so that all that water and juice comes out, and then you let it go and you let it free. And having that constriction and expansion creates more flow, creates better circulation. So we might want to explore some of those as a group. Glad to do that with you. So every relationship that we enter into, even if it is with ourselves, is dynamic, and it's a dance. Dancing is going to be key for our flow. How many of us feel comfortable dancing? And then finally, two last C words for relationship here: commitment and codependence. And I'm not going to say anything about those words. I want you to reflect on what these words have in store for you in the way of commitment, codependence. Okay? Just put this on pause for a couple seconds and just don't even look at the words and look at the image. Portal through the image and just journal. Just journal on this. Okay, so that summarizes, that was really long. That was like an hour and a half. I didn't anticipate this, but I just got in conversation with you and I just went with the flow. I just showed up and this showed up. So hopefully you put this on pause a couple times and stepped away to get some water and replenishment here. So just to restate, week 1, our general themes, creativity, emotions, and relationships. That's what we're going to be focused on for week 1. And if you check your email that you got on Monday morning, you've got some activities to focus on. And so in our webinar together on Monday, that opens up the week, I am going to introduce to you the 7 creatives. We're going to have a quiz. Some people like quizzes. And I want you to start connecting to your inner creatives. I want you to dismantle any notion that you are not artistic. And I want you to start connecting and dialoguing with these creatives. Okay? I also have an emotion log that you will have in that email. I want you to track your emotions. If you want to do it the whole month, that would be optimal. Why is it optimal? Because what you're going to find is that there's a cycle between your moon, the moon pattern, and your emotional pattern. And I want you to see where those things line up. So you might want to, when you get the emotion log, again, assessing your emotions and then putting like the little moon sign, or at least full moon, new moon, half moon, some basic numbers or letters or symbols so that you get a sense of where you're tracking with the moon. I think that's going to be very, very enlightening. Okay, I did include some reading and some videos if some of you would like that. I try to include some science and spirity kind of things here. So if you are wanting a bit more on flow, read Whole Detox, Chapter 4. Pick up a copy of The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's a really nice book. It's got a bunch of quotes, a bunch of activities. Just pick it up to, here's how I read books these days. I pick up a book. I'll pick up a book right here. Pick up a book and I just open up to a page. Oh my gosh. You know what I just opened? So I just picked up this Anatomy of the Spirit, which is on my desk and has been living here for a little bit. I just opened up to the 2nd chakra, which is what we're on with flow. And I opened up to her whole section, page 149 on cultural views of sexuality. Perfect. See, it's just like showing up, no expectation, going with the flow. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just read that page and just kind of connect into it. It's like, we don't even need a lot. We don't even need a lot. We just need to go with it. For the journaling, if you're a journaler and you've got your journal, I even have a special journal for this part of our journey together. It's orange. It's a carrot journal. So pick one of the 7 creatives and actually write out a dialogue. And if you haven't done this for the root, where I was recommending to have a dialogue and kind of connect into your body, this is really important. This is deep spiritual work to do this dialogue. Have a written dialogue. And the way that I have done it is when you have your journal, you're sitting down and you're writing from your perspective. And then you have a pillow across from you, and then you go and sit on the pillow and you put yourself into that one of those 7 creatives, or that archetype or animal, whatever it is. You write from their perspective. You actually need to get up and out of your energy field and go and sit separate from yourself, okay, in order to take on that in a better, it comes easier energetically. And then with your partner, for 1 hour, I want you to spend some time together doing a Skype video chat. Skype or Zoom, whatever you have, but just video is important. Just like I'm showing you me talking with you here. Video is important. It's important to be seen. When we're in the lower chakras, and lower does not mean less than, it just means that they're lower in our body. They're focused on lower body systems. Important to bring things into the visible reality. So many of us are uncomfortable with these chakras because, they are all so much in the physical world. So let's heal them through physical means, which is why I've been asking you to create art that is physical to take away the essence, right? So what you can do with your partner is you can simply split the hour into 2 30-minute segments. And you can say, okay, it's my turn first, and I'm just going to talk with you about some things, and your partner might chime in and say some things. You don't want to be, since you might be talking about lots of emotional stuff here, if you're not, I think for so many of us, we feel the need to kind of like step in and help people with their emotions. And one of the best ways that we can help people is, number one, by active listening, looking at them, making eye contact, and playing back what you heard. Simple mirroring activity. And in so doing, you are not giving advice, anything prescriptive. You don't want to do that. You are not therapists. You're not playing therapists to each other. You're providing some listening, some witnessing, a space to be visible with emotions. And that is so important, and it is so sacred. So please, 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 please give yourself the gift of working with your partner this month. It is even more important than the root month, okay? Because this is the chakra of partnership. So if you're not showing up for your partner, how are you showing up for yourself? How are you showing up for your emotions? How are you showing up for your creativity? How are you showing up for your goddess? How are you showing up for your body? How are you showing up for flow is what I would ask. We're going to stop here. Golly, an hour and a half. Are you still with me? All right. Thanks, everybody. Let's have a great week.